Hey folks, it's Miss Sinclair for AP World History Modern. Today we are continuing on with our Unit 4 lectures on Oceanic Interconnections. We will be looking at the English and French colonies in the Americas. So I'd like you to identify and explain one consequence of the Columbian Exchange. Our notes today are 4.5 on the English and French colonies in North America. So we are still technically in topic 4.4 out of the AP course description, looking at the continuities and changes in economic systems and labor systems from 1450 to 1750. And let's get started with our northern colonies. So we've talked already about the colonies in Spain, from Spain and from Portugal in South and Central America. Now, let's talk about what's been going on in North America. So in the 16th century, aka the 1500s, we see that Northern Europe, aka France, England, and Holland, become interested in exploration as well. By this point, the Spanish and Portuguese expeditions had already slowed down. The new gains that they had already achieved, whether it's the colonies of New Spain or Brazil or the trade empire that Portugal had set up in Africa and around the Indian Ocean, these new territories had to be governed, and so they weren't looking to add to their territories. So instead, this leaves an opening for our northern European states to move into it. The Dutch, aka from Holland, and the British built new ships improved upon the models established by the Spanish and Portuguese, and they will head northward primarily. The British will end up setting up colonies in the New World, North America specifically, and India. They will also control a couple small colonies in the Caribbean, but everyone basically claims an island or two for themselves. They are originally looking for an Arctic route to the east, right? They know if you go west, you will hit land. But surely they know the earth is round. Surely there must be a way to go west until you hit China. So maybe you can go further north and find a way to China that still involves going west, but doesn't involve hitting New Spain. The Dutch will set up colonies primarily in Southeast Asia, think specifically Indonesia. They will also claim Sri Lanka and South Africa. The French will set up their colonies in North America, in the Midwest, in the South via the Mississippi, and in Canada. And separate from all of these government-oriented expeditions, you will have private expeditions from the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company. These are both joint stock companies, and they will really profit off these explorers and amass huge fortunes. So in 1700, here's a map of the world. So the English really start settling the Americas a century after the Spanish. And they will start with the Jamestown colony. Technically, they start with Roanoke, but they all disappear, so who knows? So they start with the Jamestown colony in Virginia. It's done with the Virginia Company. This private organization gets permission from the crown to go and try and set up a colony. And basically everyone dies. They die from disease or from attacks. There's frankly no wealth. They expect to get there and just find like gold sitting around. And it's not like that at all. They also pick a terrible spot to create their fort. Sure, it's inland from the ocean, but they don't realize the tides along this river cause it to backflow. So you're dumping like your poop into the river, thinking it's getting washed out to the ocean. And it is until the tides push it back. And so when you drink water from the river, you get dysentery and die. So the crown takes over Jamestown. They try again, and this time they stop expecting to have the same experience as the Spanish and start to grow tobacco. So a big part of the North American labor systems will be the indentured servant. An indentured servant is a migrant to the British colonies in America who paid for their passage by agreeing to work for a set term ranging from 4 to 7 years. So they're not slaves, technically. It's like they're slaves for 7 years and then they're free. Planters will hire indentured servants over slaves at first because of the high mortality rates. Paying for a slave was a lot more expensive than just hiring an indentured servant. But once everyone stopped dying so much, the planters switched to slaves because the cost-benefit analysis worked better that way. So in our Jamestown colony, in our Jamestown colony, you have, of course, John Smith, like the story of Pocahontas. He is going to get there and look around and see all these merchants and bankers who essentially have no farming experience and thought they would just get to the Americas, find gold, and sail back to Britain. So they refuse to do any physical labor. So John Smith arrives there, takes charge, and says, work or die. These are your two options. And so they work. This is a very silly but fun video on Jamestown Colony. The thing is for world history, the colonies in Central America and South America are more significant for us than the colonies in North America. You will learn lots of details about the American colonies next year in APUSH. In New England, you have the Pilgrims. So the Pilgrims are a group of English Protestants who establish a colony in Massachusetts to seek religious freedom. So you might be thinking, who are they seeking religious freedom for? Wasn't England already Protestant? Yes. The Pilgrims are extremists, right? So even though England was Protestant and under the leadership of the Anglican Church, the Pilgrims felt that the Anglican Church was still too close to the Catholic Church. And so they are going to seek religious freedom in the Netherlands, which they get, but they are worried that their children are becoming too Dutch. And so they decide to go to the Americas and create their own colony. Separate from the Pilgrims, but connected with this, out of the same sort of mentality, are the Puritans. So the Puritans are Calvinists, right? They believe that God predestined souls for heaven or hell before birth, right? That's what John Calvin's whole idea was, is that because God exists all outside of time, he already knows who's going to become a Christian and be saved and who is going to reject Christ and go to hell. So the Puritans will found the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1629. And whereas the Pilgrims just rejected the Anglican Church, the Puritans want to purify it. The biggest difference between our New England colonists, the Puritans, with the colonists in Jamestown and anywhere in Latin America is the fact that they arrive as whole families. They are not just sending single men over. Women and children are traveling with them. They arrive with a sense of community. We see that they have a high life expectancy and high birth rates. So immediately you start to have the growth of an actual community instead of just like a outpost where a bunch of single dudes work. This is a really useful video to sort of explain the mentality of the Puritans and the Pilgrims. So, what about in the Mid-Atlantic region? In New England, you got the Puritans. In Virginia, in the South, you have tobacco farmers with the Jamestown colony and the Carolinas. The Carolinas were basically founded by the sons of plantation owners in the Caribbean and like Jamaica, because they're growing tons of sugar in Jamaica, but that means they're using all their arable land to grow sugar and not to grow food. So they send their sons up to the Carolinas to grow food to export to the Caribbean islands. Okay, but what about the Mid-Atlantic region? Think New Jersey, New York. Well, there are indigenous groups all around this coastline as well. And prior to the arrival of these colonists, you had trade with indigenous groups on the coastline and the British and the French. And in fact, you have instances where these native peoples who very much prided themselves, it was part of their culture, to be very clean, to be clean shaven, to style their hair. They took a lot of pride in their appearance. And these Europeans arrive who like never shave, never bathe, never brush their teeth, and they just thought they were the grossest people ever, understandably. So one of these groups is going to be team up with partners to become the Iroquois Confederacy. So the Iroquois Confederacy is an alliance of 5 northeastern Amerindian peoples that will make decisions on military and diplomatic issues through a council. They trade with the Dutch through the Hudson River, then with the English, participating in the New York trade. So the Mid-Atlantic region has a very diverse population. You have English people living there, but also Dutch, German, Swedish settlers, slaves. And one of the big groups you have here are the Quakers and William Penn, hence Pennsylvania. So the Quakers are pacifists, and they want to create good relationships with the natives. So I would like you guys to take a moment to compare and contrast the differences between English colonies in North America. Remember, if you are interested in learning more about this, there are tons of videos and resources out there. I would suggest looking at the Crash Course U.S. History videos for more in-depth understanding. All right, but what about the French? Well, the French colonies will be more similar to Spanish colonies than they are to British ones. So New France is going to be the French colony in North America with its capital, in Quebec. So Cartier, Jacques Cartier, will first sail up the St. Lawrence River in 1541. He is sponsored by a fur trading company, and once again, he's trying to find a route across the Americas to the Pacific Ocean. What he quickly finds instead is lots of native peoples willing to trade their furs for his manufactured goods. So the beaver pelt hat was all the rage in Europe, and there are lots of beavers in Canada. So the French would exchange guns, textiles, and alcohol with the native peoples for the furs. This will lead to an over-hunting of beavers, especially once they put firearms in the hands of Native Americans. And one of the things that makes the French colonists more similar to the Spanish than the English is the fact that the French colonists arrive just as independent men as opposed to family units. And they will often intermarry with the native peoples, learning their language, cultures mixing, right? This is very similar to what we saw in Spanish America. So often when they intermarried, this would create better relations with the native tribes because they sought to understand their culture, not to oppress, but to partner. And so you had this whole sort of class of people in North America. These are French fur traders with mixed heritage who lived among the Amerindian peoples. After Jacques Cartier, our next big person is going to be Samuel de Champlain. My French accent, I know, is excellent. He will continue down the St. Lawrence River in 1608. Again, looking for fur, not gold. He recognizes the Indians as equal, and the French are going to keep a very small European population in Canada for a very specific reason, right? They want to just continue this very profitable partnership. Even the Jesuits, the French Jesuits who arrive, don't try to eliminate native culture. They seek to incorporate Christianity into native culture. So Champlain will ally with the Huron people who were fighting with the Iroquois at this time. And the French will try to establish colonies in Nova Scotia and forts along the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. So Louis XIV, our king, our absolutist king, will establish the new French company, which will grant land to settlers who wish to go and build farms in Canada and all along the Mississippi River, which is also French territory. The fact of the matter is, just like with the Spanish, no French ladies want to migrate to Canada. It's cold, you're by yourself, what's the appeal? So instead, men will go over and intermarry with the native women. You also see indentured servants being used here. The fact of the matter is, Europe is experiencing some serious overpopulation due to the new crops from the Americas, especially France and England. And so a great place to send your surplus people is the New World. You also see that the health and life expectancy of people living in the New World was a lot higher than people living in Europe. So we see that there's lots of pros to moving to Canada, but in general, most people find Canada too cold and you don't have the communities settling there like you did with New Jersey or New England or Jamestown. One of the things we see is that the establishment of major companies, like the New France Company, will prevent individual loss. So you can invest in these expeditions, but know you will not be ruined. Because the French government did not provide adequate men or money for a colony, the European wars took precedence, and so these private enterprises really needed to fund it. So you see that Marquette and Joliet really explore the upper and lower Louisiana area, and La Salle will sail down the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico. And so in about 1684, they create a colony in Louisiana. This is significant because it will separate the Spanish colonies in Florida and in Texas, modern day. So they act as a barrier between Spanish colonies and thus to prevent Spain from claiming all of North America itself. So Louisiana stopped Spanish expansion. What about what's been going on more broadly? Let's take a step back. Well, Spain is weak, frankly. They're weak from foreign wars, increasing debt, internal revolts. They are threatened by France, England, and Holland. Over time, France will take control of Spanish Hispaniola. English will take Spanish Jamaica. The fact of the matter is, do you know what the difference between a privateer and a pirate is? A privateer is sponsored by the government, right? So you have pirates who have been given permission by their government, so essentially English pirates, for whom the English government said, yeah, you're totally allowed to steal from the Spanish. Or French pirates who are allowed to steal from the English and the Spanish, right? So you have this threat on the seas, you have threats back in Europe, threats with your colonies in the Americas, and the Spanish mercantile and political systems simply fail. Spain imports huge amounts of bullion, right? That's silver bars. And all of this silver will cause inflation. Also, huge amounts of the Spanish bullion will go to the Asian markets. Increasing wealth in silver did not equate to increased development in Spain because they're spending so much of it on wars. So much of it's being stolen by pirates, and they're purchasing luxury goods instead of investing in infrastructure. So in the colonies, they don't really need Spain. The colonies are very self-sufficient thanks to the hacienda system. And then back in Europe, you have the War of Spanish Succession. So Charles II, the last Habsburg king in Spain, dies without an heir. He was so inbred that he could no longer reproduce. It's probably a good thing. So if you follow the complicated bloodlines of marriages and intermarriages in Europe, the next person who would inherit the Spanish throne was actually a French prince, Philip of Anjou. He's a Bourbon prince. The Holy Roman Empire in England become very worried that Spain and France will be united under a single Bourbon monarch. And so you have the War of Spanish Succession. Basically 13 years of war because England and the Holy Roman Empire don't want this French dude to become king. The result is a treaty that ultimately weakens Spain's commercial monopoly on their own colonies. Philip does become the Spanish king, but French and English merchants can operate in the Spanish colonies and sell goods and slaves. Confused with what I just said? War of Spanish Succession in 3 minutes. So, under Philip of Anjou, right, the Bourbons want to reform Spain, make it actually functioning. So they launch a bunch of reforms to strengthen the economy and make the colonial governments more efficient. They desire for the American Indian populations to recover. They want more Spanish immigrants. They want to increase the slave trade. And they also remove any groups that they see as standing between them and their goals, like the Jesuits. For example, the Jesuits, although you might have a lot of Spanish priests, Jesuits are going to be more loyal to the Pope and thus Rome than to the Spanish crown. So Jesuits will be expelled from the Spanish Empire in 1767. We're living in this age of sort of enlightened despotism. So you have these absolutist kings and queens who are making decisions as absolutist monarchs, right? They're saying whatever they want goes. However, their decisions are going to be influenced by Enlightenment ideas as well. So they also create new viceroyalties to provide better administration and defense to populations in the New World. So you end up with, instead of just like New Spain and Peru, you will also get the viceroyalty of New Granada and the viceroyalty of Rio de la Plata. You will see commerce expanded beyond just mining, so growing tobacco, coffee, raising cattle, especially in Rio de la Plata, Argentina nowadays. And so then you can sell the leather, you can sell the beef. Stricter taxation laws are created and actually enforced. But the reaction to these laws are mixed. The colonies don't like them. They liked their freedom. They liked having a king that mostly ignored them. And part of these reforms were the fact that the Europeans don't actually view the colonies as equal. And so the Creoles in the colonies, right, these people of European descent who were born and raised in the colonies, were kept out of positions of power. And the new taxes and the commercial expansion just reorients more wealth away from the colonies back to Spain. So the results are violent confrontations with Spanish administrators and Native American uprisings, specifically Tupac Amaru. Do I have this over here? Nope. Okay. Tupac Amaru, the second, so T, like Tupac the rapper, and then Amaru. Tupac Amaru is a member of the Incan aristocracy who had survived to this point. He's going to lead a rebellion against Spanish authorities in Peru between 1780 and 1781. He's educated by the Jesuits, right? He's active in colonial trade. His rebellion will attract Creoles, mestizos, slaves, and native peoples. He will ultimately be captured and executed, but his rebellion destroys lots of property. It has a high death toll, but he is still revered as sort of a hero, right? He is a native person who is organized and leads this huge uprising against the Spanish crown. So the native identity has not been eliminated from the New World. In Brazil, you also have some reforms. Same kind of thing. They want more control of their wealth, keeping it going from the colony straight to Portugal. They want to stop people from avoiding paying their taxes. So slavery during this time will be stopped in Portugal, but slavery in Brazil will continue in a really big way. And these policies are not effective at all. The pro is you have less of a trade imbalance with England, but the con is that Brazil still suffers because the worldwide demand for what it produces is low. So I'd like you to compare our French, Spanish, and English colonies and think a little bit about the War of Succession and attempts at reform. So, what about reform and reorganization in the British colonies? Well, what we see in place here is a system known as mercantilism. This is an incredibly important term for you to know and to understand. So, mercantilism is a policy designed to promote overseas trade between the colony and the mother country. And the intent of mercantilism is to keep all the wealth going from the colony to the mother country. So basically, the colony produces raw materials, sends those raw materials for cheap to the mother country. The mother country then buys these materials for cheap, processes them, makes money off the processing, and then sells the processed goods back to the colony, right? So you can see how the mother country is making money every step of the way, and the colony is spending money, right? You have a trade imbalance that benefits the mother country over the colony. And laws were put in place to support mercantilism and thus prevent colonies from doing trade with each other, right? I want to buy some rum. Okay, well, first, I in Jamaica grow the sugar. I send it to England to be processed. They send it back, and then I have rum. Why can't I just buy rum from Puerto Rico? Right? No. Because then you'd be giving money to the Spanish crown, and Thus, England will have lost some wealth in this process. So there are going to be acts put in place. The Navigation Acts from the British are designed to keep all wealth funneled straight to the UK. You see other systems doing the same thing. The problem is you don't have a way of controlling this, right? Smuggling is going to be a huge issue. How do you enforce it, right? You're across the Atlantic Ocean. The colonies don't really like it, right? It hurts their economy because with less competition, prices drop for goods. They cannot really get loans to expand their industries. So you have a lot of smuggling and bribery. The Dutch and British East India Companies are joint stock trading companies. So that means shares were owned by wealthy merchants and aristocrats. They are designed to pursue trade in South and Southeast Asia. Because if you remember, Europe really quickly realized they can't just conquer and colonize Asia because there's already huge populations well established there who aren't going to all die off because of smallpox. So instead, they create corporations to just exploit the people instead of just conquering them. Over time, these companies begin to obtain land and rule as a political entity. We see this especially with the British East India Company in India. And we see that the British and Dutch governments really did not regulate these companies at all. So the companies could act independently and do whatever they wanted, even to the point of amassing huge fortunes and maintaining private armies. So I would encourage you to watch this to understand mercantilism. It's a long one, so you don't need to watch all of it, but I would check it out if you're at all confused. So for your summary, I'd like you to compare and contrast Spanish, British, and French colonies in the Americas, and please explain the continuities and changes in economic systems and labor systems in the Atlantic colonial European relationship. All right. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.